You're listening to TheFlickcast, a pop culture podcast. I'm Chris Ulrich. Now, normally this would be the point where I'd say, and with me as always, Joe Dilworth, my co-host, except Joe Dilworth is not here this week. But that's okay, he'll be back. Nothing's happened to him, he's fine. Sometimes people have lives and they have to go do other things. It's not a problem. Don't worry. He will be back. In the meantime, I've got a really great guest for the show, and I'm really excited about it. She was fun to talk to and so knowledgeable about things that I love, like writing and creating content and just Dungeons and Dragons and all kinds of cool stuff. Her name is Ashley Warren, and she is a writer and a narrative designer. And her most recent book is a module for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition called Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. It's a really great adventure, and you should definitely buy it. And you should buy all of her stuff at DM's Guild and anything else she does because she's cool and she knows her stuff. Anyway, here's Ashley. So how do you were talking about you're working all basically at home. So I know you're a person who probably is good at organizing and planning and having a workflow that works for you and everything. So are you doing anything differently working at home that you would normally do if you were going to an office, or is it kind of the same, or what, how are you coping?
Sure, that's a good question. So in general, I've worked from home for a few years now. So in some ways, it's not that different. But what's mostly different is that I used to go to the office a few times a week, or at least, a couple times here and there when I needed to. So I was still like around my coworkers sometimes. And now I'm just like not doing that at all. We're all just working 100% remotely. So that's been a little bit of a challenge, is that before, even though I was working from home, I still would go out and about throughout the day. Sometimes I would go to the gym in the afternoons, or, go work out of a coffee shop. And I love to work out of my local co-working space here in Reno. But all of those places are, closed right now, or not the safest places, like going to the gym. So that has really affected my daily schedule and my workflow, just because I was used to having a balance between being home and working a little bit outside of the house. And that was good for me for both my productivity and just my mental health. So that's been kind of an adjustment, is just being home so much. I still try to find opportunities to at least like go for a walk around my neighborhood and actually just like get physically out of the house without being around anyone else. But in terms of my process and productivity, I am totally a productivity nerd. So I'm always thinking about systems and workflows and tools and efficiency and better ways to be creative. So I feel like a lot of that has actually changed for me this year, just really putting my normal processes, through their paces and adjusting them to account for the circumstances of the world. So if there has to be a good thing that came out of 2020, I would say that for me, that's been it, is that I've been really focusing on just organizing my life in ways that I have never really done before. I've always been organized. I've always had good processes because that's just important to me. But this year has been really a year that I've been able to focus on that. So that's good. I feel like going into 2021, I am probably the most organized now that I've ever been. So it's been nice to have some time to spend doing that. And I also believe that processes are best made during difficult times in our life, because when we make processes that are based on aspirational versions of ourselves, they're not that realistic and helpful for us. So when we can make processes and systems that carry us through the harder times, then when we do have good times, then our processes are already in place. So that's kind of something I try to ascribe to.
Wow, yeah, you sound way more organized than I am. That's amazing. I'm more of an analog person, I guess, because I'm old, and so I've always had notebooks and pencils and paper around. I just jot stuff down. I got notebooks everywhere. Are you more of a digital kind of organizing person, or are you more like, I got to write this down to remember it later or whatever? I mean, are you into that kind of thing, or is it more digital for you?
Sure. So I am firmly in both camps. And it's funny because this topic has come up like 10 times for me this week with just conversations with my friends and with my mentees in my Patreon group. And these are things that I'm always kind of experimenting with for my own use. And I try to share what I've learned with other people in my community. But I really like both. But for me, analog and digital serve different purposes. I do have a analog planner that I write in every day, and I have a bullet journal that I write things down in, because sometimes it is faster to just grab a piece of paper and write things down. But sometimes it's faster to have things a little bit more automated through digital tools. And so I'm a big fan of setting up workflows and automations and kind of digital systems for myself as well. Plus, I'm a huge believer in like note taking and always documenting the things that I'm learning. Even if I'm reading an email newsletter, I'll try to jot down a few takeaways from that and put it into my digital system so that I can reference it later. I basically grow an archive of my own personal learnings and takeaways from things. And I like to be able to schedule things digitally because it's nice to get a reminder. And if I just relied on my analog tools for that, it requires more brain power from me. And I try to always cut down on things that require time and energy from me and automate those when possible. So that's why I feel like digital tools serve a certain purpose for me. They're searchable, you can automate them, they remind you about things that you need to be reminded about. And then I like analog tools for more like reflective type tasks, like if I'm writing in my journal or looking through my, weekly schedule or things like that. So I don't know. My answer is that I like both because I think that they're both good for different reasons.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of like that, I guess, too. I'll have all my notebooks around and I'll jot down, like, I don't do a ton of research for interviews, which makes me sound terrible probably, but I did some and I had some questions I jotted down and then I typed them into my computer. So they're sitting in my computer now. I'm looking at them. So I'll have them as a record. But yeah, I've always been, I think because I grew up when, I didn't even have a computer. And so, right. Or I did, but it was like an Apple II Plus or something back in the day. And so you just kind of don't have those tools. And everybody's got a phone, everybody's got this and that and whatever. So I just am used to writing it down. Someone told me something interesting, and I don't know if you believe in this philosophy too, but they were saying that your brain is for solving problems. So what he does is he dumps it off onto his notebook and whatever, and to remember stuff. He doesn't want to have to remember anything to use his brain for that. He just wants his brain to solve the problems that he doesn't have to remember or something. I'm not saying it probably really well, but I found that interesting though, because your brain is just, you can look at your notes and go, oh yeah, I got to solve that problem. I got to solve that problem. I got to solve that problem. But you don't have to remember anything, which I thought was interesting. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. That sounds a lot like someone I follow named Tiago Forte, who runs Forte Labs. And he actually runs a course that I took earlier this year that really helped me update my digital systems. It was called Building a Second Brain, because the goal of it is basically to alleviate your brain from having to remember all these things, from having to do all the mundane things that your brain has to do every day, so that you can be more creative and use your energy and your time and just basically like your creative output to do the things that actually matter to you. So I feel like having good systems in general is really the purpose. Like that's really the goal of all of that. So yeah, I definitely am someone who believes in that theory.
Yeah, it makes sense. I had never heard it before. My friend Dave Kalo told me that. He actually has a different kind of podcast. His podcast is more about working at home and everything. But we play, he's in my regular Tuesday night D&D session, so we speak every week. But and we'll get to D&D in a minute, definitely. So yeah, I found that fascinating. But it makes sense because that's what I've been doing all this time. I just didn't realize that it had a kind of name or it had someone had thought of it. So it was pretty impressive. So when you're writing, because you do a lot of writing, right? I mean, you write, obviously, adventures for Dungeons and Dragons, and you wrote a novel and some short stories, I noticed, and a bunch of other stuff. When you're writing, are you an outliner, or are you a kind of just jump in and start writing, or how do you have a process at all, kind of thing like that?
Yeah, for me, it's a mix of both, and it also changes based on the project. When I'm writing adventure content or any sort of narrative game design content, I really have to start with an outline, because those types of documents are a little bit more structured than a novel or a short story. Of course, there's structure to those as well, but it's a little bit different, because when you're designing an adventure, you're designing an experience that can play out in so many different ways. And so for me, I can't just open up a blank page and just start writing an adventure. I have to really plan out the narrative arc and the different outcomes and the potential threads that could spin off of those. So I tend to be a little bit more outline focused with D&D content or narrative design content. And I like mind mapping, I like outlining. To me, those are kind of important parts of the process that I just need to get the thoughts out of my head. And if I don't do those, then I find that my adventures kind of suffer later in the process, because I realize that I didn't account for things that I would have if I had spent the time outlining that. When it comes to fiction, I also do some outlining, but it's not quite as detailed as my adventure writing is, because I find those types of writing to be different, even though there's some overlap. And what I like about both of those is I love writing like atmosphere and setting details. And so those are my favorite parts to write in both fiction and adventure content. But for the story paths, I do a little bit of outlining for fiction as well, but it's not quite as strict, because I like to kind of see how the story might flow or change over time. But since that's a different experience for the reader. It's a little bit more passive where they're not affecting the outcome. I don't feel personally the need to be as strict with my outline, if that makes sense.
No, it
so
makes, it does.
Yeah, it just kind of depends on the project.
Sure. No, I just how I first became aware of you, I guess is the proper term, is with your RPG Writers Workshop, and the stuff you were just describing there is all things that we tried to do during that. And I have to admit something that I probably shouldn't admit. I did not get my adventure published. I didn't get to that point, so I kind of failed. I feel terrible, but
that is okay. There is no failing the RPG Writer Workshop.
Thank you.
Because
okay, good.
Our goal is not really publishing. Our goal is really just to help you refine your process. And if something in our process that we've shared with you doesn't work for you, that is totally okay. Because I actually think that that's just as valuable to learn, is that here's a process from start to finish. Here's what I didn't like about it, so I can implement my own changes, into my own process, because we want anything that you do creatively to actually work for you. So that's okay. And really, as long as you had fun and maybe learned something, that's our goal. So I don't think you failed. There's no pass fail.
Well, that's good. I did feel bad. I'll be honest. The writing of the sort of adventure was not the hardest part for me, because I've written for years, but I think I got more intimidated by the idea of, now I have to find an artist to get this or whatever, and just sort of putting it all together, which is the point I got to. And then I kind of went, well, I don't know what to do with all this. So if I had any, not criticisms, but I had any kind of, feedback, I guess that would be my feedback. It's just that part of it was more intimidating because I don't know a lot of people like that. So.
Sure. Well, and it's tricky because art and layout and all of that is a totally different skill set from writing. So it makes total sense that writers get stuck at that point. And I would say that tends to be the place that many of our participants get stuck. What we try to encourage is just keeping that part super, super simple, especially for your very first adventure, because your layout doesn't have to be super ornate or beautiful. It can just be simple and readable, because that's really what the dungeon master or game master needs from your document. The art is nice, and I think art is super important and plays a specific role in adventure content. But I think for new writers who are publishing their first adventures, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to finish your draft, to finish, the module, and share it and put it out in the world so you can get feedback, because then the next project you do will be better, and you might have a little bit of money to put toward your art or your layout. You can maybe partner with someone who can do the layout for you. So that's kind of like our perspective on it, but it makes perfect sense to me when people get to layout and art and they're like, I don't really know where to start here, because it really is its own thing, and it takes a long time. That's people's entire career. So it's okay if you're just sticking with super simple layout assets and things like that, but that makes sense to me. So don't feel too bad about that. That's
good. Thank you.
A very relatable experience, I think, for a lot of our participants.
But I really found it enjoyable, and I want to make sure that I mentioned that I did find it enjoyable, and I think it's useful for anybody who wants to, for writing in general, but I think if you want to create content for Dungeons & Dragons in particular, it was very useful. I enjoyed it very much. I was going to do it again, but I got busy, but I enjoyed it a lot. And I didn't take like writing in school or whatever. I've always done it, and I've done other things. I went to film school, so I guess there was some writing in there, but I've always sort of written, and I no one ever sort of told me, here's your process you can go through. So I will, like if I'm writing a book, I just finished my book, and I just basically started typing. I didn't really think about it. I had some characters in mind or whatever, but the thing that was great about your course was that it helps you sort of organize things better. And I definitely think that that's useful for someone like myself, who's just more of a, let's see what happens kind of guy. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed the experience. And I think there's plenty of value in just opening up a page and starting to write. And I think that some projects do come not easily. I don't feel like anything with writing is ever easy, but sometimes a story just flows out of you in ways that other story ideas might not. I will say that I feel like, and this is from my own experience as a writer and being part of writer communities for, years and years, is that a lot of writers have lots of great ideas, but it's actually finishing those ideas and seeing things through completion that can be tricky for people. And so one of our goals through the workshop is always to try to establish process as an important factor, because some people can just write and finish a book from start to finish, and it comes a little bit more naturally to them. But for, I would say, most writers, that's not really the case. So if you can develop a process for yourself that is sustainable so that you can write a book to completion and then write another book to completion and build your writing portfolio that way, then I think that that's good for anyone's, creative career. But there's no one process, and sometimes a process doesn't have to be structured. It just is something that works for you, that helps you come up with an idea and actually see that idea to fruition without getting burnt out on the idea and then just like never finishing anything.
Right, exactly. How many unfinished novels are there out there? I'm sure quite a few. But yeah, that makes sense. So you have a process that may not be formal, like A, B, C, D, but you have it something that works for you. That makes perfect sense. So Dungeons and Dragons. I want to make sure we talk about that for sure, because that's a very fun, very enjoyable game that I love to play. So if you could think back a little bit to what was your first sort of Dungeons and Dragons experience? How'd you get introduced to the game?
So I would say that my very first introduction to D&D was as a kid when I would check out some of the early edition D&D books at the library. I didn't really know what any of it meant. I knew that it was a game and I knew the concept of like a role play game. But when you look at some of the older edition books and you don't really have an understanding of how it all works, it kind of doesn't make total sense. But I was really intrigued by just the creatures and the settings and the stories. And so I knew that eventually someday I would want to get into Dungeons and Dragons, because I've always been a huge nerd over fantasy and science fiction and things like that. So as a bookworm, being able to actually, play in immersive games like that seemed really fun. Unfortunately, I just didn't know anyone for most of my life who was even remotely interested in D&D or had played it. I guess I just wasn't asking the right people, but even with my friends in high school, I remember bringing it up once, and even my geeky friends were like, D&D, that's like for real geeky people.
Lame.
And I'm like,
no one wants to play that.
I know, but I'm like, we are the real geeky people. So I don't know. It just I just never really had the opportunity. And I think if I had understood a little bit more about how a game, is facilitated, I probably would have just been the dungeon master for my friends and just volunteered myself. But at that time, I didn't really have a good example of what any of that looked like. Not like now where we have all of these great shows where you could see people playing. There's the barrier to entry is a little bit different now. So I didn't really actually play D&D until a few years ago, well into adulthood. And I finally had real geek friends who were excited to play D&D. And it just so happened that one of my close friends has been a dungeon master for like several decades. He used to DM for his siblings when he was young. And so he just had so much knowledge and experience and volunteered to run a game for us. And at that point, I just basically went all in, and my life has been so much about D&D ever since.
Yeah, it seemed to have worked out pretty well for you. So not everybody gets to play the game and then actually when I was growing up, when we were playing, they called them modules. You don't call them modules anymore, right?
I actually use the word module. I feel like I see other people in the community use that as well. And we kind of use that term as it comes up in the workshop as well. So I don't know if that's everyone's like chosen word, but I think it still makes sense as referring to like a book or an adventure.
Yeah, because people are like, oh, it's not a module. People, it's like an adventure, or it's like a source book, or it's this, and it's all these terms and everything now. I mean, when I first started, it was, Dungeons and Dragons. It wasn't even Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I remember when the first Player's Handbook came out and the first Dungeon Master's Guide and all that stuff. So yes, again, I am older. But your most recent book that you were involved in is Icewind Dale: Rime of the Frost Maiden, correct?
Correct.
And so how did you get involved with that? And I also noticed there's another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is this DM's Guild Adept. So if you can weave those two things together, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, well, they are actually related. So once I started playing D&D, I think it was about a year after we had been playing like every week, like all of my friends and I were just like all in. Became a huge part of our life, but I wanted to start writing my own adventures because I really enjoyed the act of actually playing through a story together. And as someone who's always been a writer in some capacity, that just really appealed to me. So even though I didn't really know a lot about narrative design at that time, I figured like, why not try to publish a one-shot adventure? And so my dungeon master was like, there's a place called Dungeon Masters Guild that's actually for that, where you can publish D&D content and people can buy it. And so I was really lucky that that platform existed to actually help me, publish my first adventure. So I basically just I put together my first adventure. I feel like I wrote it in like a fugue state because I just wrote it. I like wrote it in like a weekend, and it was just so, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I was so excited about it. And so I published it on Dungeon Masters Guild, and I was shocked when people actually purchased it because it was my very first adventure, and I didn't really know what the market was like on Dungeon Masters Guild. But that first taste, just like, I just got so excited. So then this was in December of 2017. So I'm coming up on like my 3-year anniversary of writing D&D content. And after that, I basically published an adventure a month on Dungeon Masters Guild for like 6 months in a row. I was just like on a tear. I feel like I had so I went to grad school a few years ago. And after that, I was kind of trying to find my way back to fiction writing and creative writing because I had been in like the research, field, doing more. I was a journalist for a while. And so I was doing other kinds of writing, but I hadn't really been doing creative writing. So in 2017, I really was kind of finding my way back to creative writing, and D&D writing seemed to really be the outlet for me. So I just became like obsessed with writing adventures and producing adventures. I loved being able to do my own like layout and pick my own cover art because as a writer, you usually don't get opportunities to do those things. Like if you do publish a novel through a publishing house, you're usually not the one who gets to pick the cover. Maybe you have a little bit of input, but traditionally you're not the one doing that. That's another department. You kind of just let other people do that for you. So I really liked being able to produce my own adventure content and do every part of that. And then about 6 months into it, I was invited to be a guild adept. And I'll admit that at the time, I had no idea what that meant. I just got a Twitter
Sounds
DM.
Good, though.
Yeah, it sounded good.
Yeah.
I got a Twitter DM from Chris Lindsay, who works for Wizards of the Coast, and he's the founder of the Guild Adept program. And it's basically Wizards of the Coast picks people in the Dungeon Masters Guild community that they think are, promising talent, I guess, to produce content that they're usually like supplemental materials to the official releases. And so as a guild adept, you get access to all of the official art, you get to see the books ahead of time, and basically you're encouraged to create supplemental material for the upcoming releases, which is really great. And so you also get other opportunities, like I got to write an official Adventurers League trilogy and another official Adventurers League adventure and things like that. So you kind of get certain opportunities as a guild adept, and you basically work kind of closely with the Wizards of the Coast team. And so
that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's a really cool program. I did leave a few months ago so that I could focus on my other projects, and also because I'm really hoping that they'll bring some new folks on board, because I know for me personally, it was such a great experience. I learned so much with the other guild adepts. Just being part of that program helped to expose my work to, a bigger audience. And so I really feel like I gained so much from that. So I'm hoping that other folks will have the same opportunity. And I think that it's kind of hard for me to say exactly how I got on board with Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostmaiden, because I truly think that it was a variety of factors. I think it's partly because I was a guild adept. I think it's probably partly because of my work with the RPG Writer Workshop. I also did another big project on Dungeon Masters Guild called the Uncaged Anthology, which was kind of an unexpected success. I don't know. Sometimes I try to be humble about things, so it feels weird for me to be like, this project was super successful, but it was a collaborative project that really took off in ways that none of us really expected. And so I think that between those, different things that I was doing in the community, that's kind of what helped me get the opportunity to write on Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostmaiden. And also Chris Perkins had put out a call on Twitter for people to share some of their favorite writers in the D&D community, and lots of generous folks mentioned my name, which I'm just eternally grateful for. And so I think that's probably what helped as well. But to be honest, I personally don't know what the one thing was. I don't think it was one thing. I think it was just a variety of things, probably just being really consistent with how much work that I was putting out for like a year, and being a guild adept, working with other people in the community, and just kind of building up my portfolio of RPG work. And then Chris Perkins reached out to me about Icewind Dale, and I was like, yes, please, because
I'm too busy for that, Chris. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I just signed on for another big project at the same time. So it was kind of a wild time in my life, but I was really excited about the opportunity. And plus I was really excited about the book itself, because I wanted to make sure that if I were to work on, an official Dungeons and Dragons book that it would be a story that I was really passionate about, that I felt like I could really bring something to,
Sure.
because there's some lore that I'm not as, familiar with, just because in some ways I'm still a noob when it comes to D&D. I mean, I like to think at this point that I've done a lot of research about the different, settings and things like that. But I wanted to make sure that it was something that felt compatible with what I enjoyed writing about. And Icewind Dale is like one of my favorite locations in the Forgotten Realms. And that was actually one of my first adventures was set in Icewind Dale. So it kind of felt like it was meant to be. So I was really excited about that opportunity. And of course, said yes, and then, screamed when I got the email. I think I was at the gym and I remember dropping my phone because I was like checking my emails on the elliptical machine, and I got an email from Chris Perkins and I was like, ah.
Nice. Yeah, that's kind of a big deal, right? I mean, if you're creating your own content and then now you're doing something sort of official, you get this sort of, I guess they tap you on the shoulder and he's like, come up to the, I don't know, come up to the major leagues or something. I'm trying to think of if appropriate sports metaphor, but I'm failing. But it's amazing. Can you just, without spoiling anything, can you just give me a brief sort of idea? Because I don't DM that much, so I don't get a chance. I don't read all their adventures, because if someone's going to DM this for me, I don't want to know everything. So I haven't had a chance to read it. But can you just sort of tell me a little bit about it without ruining it too much?
Yeah, sure. I can give you a spoiler-free synopsis.
There we go.
Yeah, which is basically that the story is that Icewind Dale, this location in the Forgotten Realms, it's this known cold location. It's always cold, but it's especially cold because it's under the spell of the Frost Maiden, whose name is Auril, and she is basically keeping Icewind Dale under her everlasting winter, because that's kind of her thing as the Frost Maiden. And so the goal of the story, the adventure, is to break this spell and to try to, relieve the people of Icewind Dale from this everlasting winter, because it's not like a normal winter. It's basically a winter that's making everything impossible to live and flourish. So that's kind of what the spirit of the adventure is. And of course, there's, lots of fun little side quests within that. But what I liked most about it, and how Chris Perkins had approached me and the other writers about it, was that in a way it's kind of an allegory for climate change, because the story's kind of overarching theme is that we can make a difference with the climate of the world. We can make choices that have a positive effect on communities. And I just thought that was like a really powerful message. And so that's kind of the analogy of the book and what the kind of general story is. And yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I'm biased, and also cool as a pun, I guess, because it's cold.
It is a pun because it's a cold adventure. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. In fact, I thought that it might have been some sort of, because you had mentioned that you wanted it to be something that you were passionate about. I mean, telling the story, but I feel like it's also because of the sort of environmental aspects of it too. Is that something you're passionate about, the environment?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
When I was a journalist, I used to be an environmental journalist, and I would cover, local things here in Reno about, local farm efforts and sustainability efforts. And so, yeah, that's definitely something that I care a lot about in my personal life. And I really love that about Dungeons and Dragons, that it does give us an opportunity to reflect on the choices we make. And also there's something really inspirational about, banding together with other heroes and trying to save the world in some capacity, and sometimes that's just doing a little side quest that makes a huge difference. And so I always like that as kind of how I think about D&D and its relationship to just our day-to-day lives. I know that's kind of a high level thing to say, but I don't know, something I find special about it.
No, it's absolutely true. I think that it's been, for me at least, and I don't know if you find this the case as well, but especially during the time we're going through right now, it's been really great to play, but it's also, I can look forward to the Tuesday night game. I can look forward to, you can sort of separate yourself from what's going on in the world a little bit, because we're not, in our adventure, we're not out there trying to cure a plague or anything, although I guess we could, but it's just, I'd gotten out of D&D for a while, and then, I don't know if I mentioned it, but I came back into it like maybe 8 or 9 months ago, but then COVID and everything, and it's just been it's really been, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's really been something to uplift my spirits. And I think that all the people that play with us feel kind of the same way. It's just one of those great things that you can do, and it kind of takes you away from what's going on, and you can be an adventurer, and like you said, go and save the world, and you can make a positive effect on things. And do you play a regular game still every week or every couple of weeks, or are you still in a game?
Yeah, I'm still in a game right now. Our schedules are a little hectic right now just because that's how things are going. But yeah, we are playing a campaign. I'm actually dungeon mastering, and we're playing a
Nice.
Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign. So that was the hardcover book that came out, I think, in 2018. And it's a lot of fun. Of course, we have our own homebrewed elements to it, and yeah, I enjoy it. I'm sure I could be doing more as a dungeon master to improve, the digital experience of playing online, because we used to play in person. We used to play at my house. And so that was honestly, we didn't play for a few months because I just was feeling so burnt out on doing like Zoom calls. It's like everyone had to transition to doing things online. And I just was like, I just miss seeing my friends in person. But we're now back into a pretty regular schedule of playing every few weeks. But we try to get together whenever we can and play online. But I look forward to seeing all my friends in person around the table again in the future, hopefully near future.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. It'd be great. But the nice thing about it is that a lot of the people that play in our game are not in the same place. Like most of them are on the East Coast or whatever. And it's been a great opportunity. Yeah. I hate that you can't be around the table because I miss that sort of the more intimacy of it, I guess. But it's great unless, like Roll20 or something fails or whatever. But do you use those kind of tools, or do you have special tools?
We haven't lately. I used to actually work for a virtual tabletop company called Astral Tabletop, which is a really cool player in the tabletop virtual tabletop space. So we're mostly just using Zoom right now, and sometimes we share maps. But honestly, I found that it was easier for us if we kept things kind of low key. I think that Roll20 and those kinds of platforms are awesome, especially if you buy the ready-made modules, because if you're setting those things up manually, it can really be a time commitment. And so we're just keeping it easy right now and just using Zoom and sometimes Google Meets if Zoom's not working.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just find that to be kind of what works for us right now, because really it's just an opportunity for us to see each other and talk. And of course, we're playing a game together, but it's really just our time to hang out and socialize.
Definitely. Yeah, we started out just, we played on Discord for a while, and then we started to basically just, we'd share a map on Google or whatever, and then like, well, let's try Roll20, and it's been okay. It's mostly for like combat, because you can help move your characters around and everything, and that seems to be easier in some ways, unless, it has a problem. Like we've been trying to use it on the Twitch stream, and occasionally it just sort of glitches out because there's too many things going on, especially with like new dynamic lighting and all this other stuff. So I kind of miss the idea that, like, well, maybe we could just make it simpler again and just hold up a map in the to the camera and we can all see that. But
right.
So do you prefer being the dungeon master, or do you prefer to play, or it doesn't matter to you?
That's a good question. I like aspects of both. Sometimes I prefer playing because I think since I'm writing so much D&D content, sometimes when I'm dungeon mastering, it feels a lot like that. It feels like work sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like the opportunity to just be a player and just not really have to do so much, preparation. I think if I weren't so active in writing D&D content, I would probably enjoy dungeon mastering more, because I would have a little bit of a break, I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to explain. I just feel like it takes a lot of brain power for me to dungeon master. And I feel like it's something that I like in theory, and I really like to DM for my friends, because we just have such a great little group and it's just fun to see what they'll do. But I don't know, lately I kind of prefer playing. It's just, I don't know. It's easier for me to just hang out and make choices for just my one character rather than trying to voice all the NPCs and figure out what they're going to do next and things like that.
Well, yeah, the dungeon mastering bar is raised a lot higher now by like, Matt Mercer and people like that. So I was like, well, aren't you going to do voices? What's going on here? Why don't you acting it all out perfectly? So, but yeah, I prefer to play. I mean, I'm trying to DM for some friends of mine that I knew from LA when I lived there, but it's a lot. It's so much work. I'm like, I have to prepare this whole thing. I can't just wing it. What the heck? You're absolutely right. Just making decisions for one character is definitely a lot simpler. So you've had so much success, I think, in creating content for Dungeons and Dragons. Everything. Have you run into any? I'm trying to say this delicately. Have you run into any sort of resistance at all? Because I know that in my experience back in the day, there weren't as many women playing. I don't know how else to say it, but have you run into any kind of pushback about that, or has it been pretty easy for you?
So I will say overall, my experience in the D&D community has been just like overwhelmingly positive. And I just feel like I have connected with so many great people who have really enjoyed my work and have told me so. And I feel very supported in most of the projects that I do. I have had, my share of, rude emails, and, I think most people, anyone in the community who's not a straight white male has probably gotten at least one weird Twitter message or something like that. I've definitely been accused of trying to ruin D&D, which I consider to be a badge of honor, because usually people who are accused of that are people who are trying to do something cool in D&D or something new. And so I don't really take that stuff too personally, but you know, in some ways I'm a pretty private person. And so doing public facing work is kind of a challenge for me at times. I really enjoy it, but every now and then I'm reminded that, oof, you know, I'm putting myself out there. And sometimes it's a little scary, especially when some anonymous dude sends you a really long email about all the things you like did wrong in your adventure. Or sometimes I'll get weird emails about like the RPG Writer Workshop and just like how, you know, flawed all of our curriculum is and things like that. And it's like, I am always open for, you know, feedback, because a writer has to be. And so that comes with the territory. But there's some feedback that I don't feel is in, you know, the best spirit or is intended to be helpful. I think it's intended to be patronizing. But so, I mean, those things do happen, and I don't want to really like sugarcoat it, because I know other women in the community have experienced similar things. And, you know, I'm very privileged that I'm a white woman. So I, you know, get certain kinds of, you know, harassment every now and then, but that's not really the same thing that people of color get. And there are some legitimate problems in our community with how people are treated. And I think that those things are hopefully improving, but I can't really, you know, speak to all of that. I can only really speak to my experiences. So yeah, I think, you know, those things do come up. Sometimes people can be, you know, creepy or too familiar. Sometimes people can be so overly critical of your work. Like one person like went and like gave all of my adventures on DM's Guild 1 star one time. I don't know why. I guess they just didn't like me.
Too much time on their hands, clearly.
Too much time on their hands. And you know what? I try not to spend too much time worrying about people who don't like me, because all I can really do is put out the best work that I feel that I can do and try to support other people in the community. And when I focus on those things, then it makes it easier to deal with all the other things. But yeah, I don't know. Every now and then you get a bad message or email and you're just like, ugh, this is weird.
Yeah, I think people are just, I mean, there are a lot of jerks out there and a lot of people, I could use worse language, but you know what I mean. It's just, I don't understand that kind of behavior, because I think D&D is supposed to be, you know, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it's supposed to be as inclusive as possible. I mean, the world, it's a huge world that everyone should be able to play in. And I don't understand people who try to gatekeep. I mean, I worked in the entertainment industry for a long time, so I understand gatekeeping, but it's just, I don't know why when you're in something, you feel the need to keep other people out of it. It's just, it makes no sense. I guess my brain's not wired that way. I don't want to be keeping people out, because D&D has been such a positive influence for me, especially lately, that I'm like, everyone, come on, let's go play. It's amazing. So yeah, I just don't get that. And I'm a white male, so I don't get any problems usually. I cannot imagine what it must be like for you or for other people. It's just ridiculous to me. I don't understand it, but I'm sorry that happens. I mean, I feel that I should say that. I'm sorry that happens to you. That's ridiculous.
Well, I appreciate that. And I do want to reiterate that I really truly feel that my experience has been positive, and that the support I've gotten really overrides any sort of negative interactions. It just is an unfortunate reality for a lot of creators, especially marginalized creators, that they get, you know, harassed or get criticized in ways that other creators don't. And so I think if we can all be aware of that and call it out when we see it and try to, you know, foster an inclusive community, because that's something that we have to all actively work at. It doesn't just happen. You have to really put in the effort to make people feel welcomed and included and supported. And I think if we can all do that, then we can hopefully make our community truly inclusive rather than just claiming it is. Because I also like to think that it is. And I think that I think women have always been playing D&D. I just think that they didn't feel welcome at a lot of other people's tables. And so they mostly probably stuck to their own tables. And I think that is true for a lot of marginalized communities, that they've always been a part of D&D, but what we assume to be the D&D player, you know, was assigned to a very specific type of person. And now that's really changing because we have so much more representation in D&D media. I mean, if you look at a lot of the new actual play shows, like there's so many new faces, and it's so great. And so I'm hoping that will continue, and that will also bring new folks into the hobby.
Definitely, that would be great. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because if you look at all the guys who created D&D, they're all guys basically, and they're all white dudes, and they're all like Gygax and all those guys. It's like, yeah, that's kind of like what was around then, and there might have been, there might have been women there too, but they're never in any of the pictures or whatever.
Sure.
It's just, it was definitely like a little boys club, which is unfortunate, which is what it was for me when I was a kid, because, I played with all my friends. But now, I mean, I think it should be, but you make an excellent point though. It's like, we always assume that it's supposed to be inclusive, but we have to make sure that it actually is. That's a great point. I think I need to definitely be more aware of that. So thank you for that. That's a good point. So my other question is there anything about the game that you would change at all? Or, I mean, what would you alter for the game if you could?
That's a good question. I will say that I love D&D, and there are a lot of folks in our community who have gotten into narrative games, through D&D, but are now seeing that there's so many other games that might, suit their interests better. And so I think that's totally fair. I think people should be exploring all the other amazing, tabletop RPGs that are available. But I don't know. I think I'll always have a soft spot for D&D specifically because it was my entry point, but also I like a lot about it. I like the different, classes and elements to that. I will say that things to change. And I know that this was kind of addressed in the recent release, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, where they had made some adjustments to the racial builds. When you build a character, like historically, you would get certain features and traits or lose certain features and traits based off of the race you chose to play. And a lot of great discourse has come out of that in the past couple of years about how that's, problematic and how that could be changed to still encourage creative gameplay and creative character builds without so much of the weird, racial connotations that's making. So I know that Wizards of the Coast is making some changes to that, and I haven't actually read the new book yet, so I can't really attest to what's in there, but it sounds like there is more that could be done to improve that. And so I'm eager to see more of that. And I think in general, I would love to see more like sensitivity readers brought onto projects, because although a lot of the fictional settings in D&D modules are fictional, some of them are still based off of real world analogs and sometimes not very respectful ways, especially in some of the older content.
Yeah.
And I know that, again, they made some changes to like Curse of Strahd specifically because of the portrayal of the Vistana in that book historically have been pretty problematic because it takes a lot of really negative stereotypes from real world cultures and doesn't really portray them very sensitively. And so I know they've made some changes to that. Again, I actually haven't gotten the new copy of that, so I can't attest to what's been changed or whatever, but I know that they've made some efforts. So I hope that in the future that will be actually like baked into the process, that when a new book is being worked on, they bring sensitivity readers and specialists into the process as early as possible so that anyone who reads any of the books feels welcome and they feel represented in not weird and, stereotypical ways, and that we can actually play in this fun fictional fantasy landscape without having to deal with the more problematic elements that are from all the older books. So I guess in some ways those are what I would like to be the main changes, and I think that helps with bringing new narrative and game designers onto the official teams who diversifying their team with all the many great creators that are out there, because I think that the people who are making a lot of the games are still very much, white, male, cisgender.
Yeah.
And even though I've also participated in a book that didn't have as much diversity as it should have. So I think that those would be some really valuable changes, because the more diverse and inclusive all of our media is, like, the more everyone benefits from that, because we just get better stories from that. So I think that things are shifting in that direction. So I hope they will continue to do so.
Yeah, I agree. Why would you want to keep the pool of potential stories so narrow? Why would you,
Yep.
or just, I guess narrow and pool are not really two words that go together for an analogy, but still.
Sure.
And I'm a writer too, can't you tell? But yeah, I think you want to have as a vast amount of people as you can, because you can get better stories that way. That makes logical sense to me, and it makes emotional sense, and it just, it just makes sense in general. But it's just, there seems to be some reluctance, or I think when you have a big property, especially how popular it's become again, and it's just corporations are just slower to make changes and slower to implement the things they need to change. I feel like it's going in the right direction, but you probably, I'm sure would know better than I would, what's going on, because you're, dialed in with all those people, so you would know. So I hope you're right. I hope it happens. I hope it happens soon. So what are you, I know that you're changing the name of the RPG Writers Workshop, right? And what else are you working on now? Just so we can, everybody make sure we know.
Sure. So, yeah, we are rebranding the RPG Writer Workshop to be the Storytelling Collective. And we're doing that so that we can continue to expand our course catalog. Of course, that means still focusing on tabletop RPG, courses and programs related to that, but also things related to the creative process and other forms of storytelling that we think our community could benefit from. Because what happens every workshop is that, a lot of people ask questions about things pertaining to, creative process and, design and things like that. And those are not necessarily specific to writing adventure content. So what we want to do is, expand our catalog a bit and to welcome different types of storytellers, while still, of course, encouraging people to join us for Write Your First Adventure and things like that. And really our goal is to focus on storytelling that is immersive and interactive. And I really consider narrative design to be the storytelling of the future, because I think more and more of our media experiences are going to be interactive and narratively driven in that way. So it's a great time to really develop that skill set. So that's a big thing that is on the agenda. I've been working on that for most of this year. So I'm excited that we're actually getting closer to the rebrand and the launch. And it's really it's more of an expansion rather than a change. Like, we still will focus on many of the same things that we've been focusing on. So that's one thing that I'm working on. Another project that I am wrapping up shortly is another D&D book that I've worked on for pretty much the whole year.
Nice.
Which is called Heckna, and that's with Hit Point Press. And we actually did a Kickstarter for this book in October. I think September. Time doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't anymore, yeah.
But we raised, I think, $600,000 for the book. Yeah, which is incredible. And Hit Point Press has a great track record of running really successful Kickstarters. They do the Deck of Many animated spell cards. They also do Humblewood, and they are publishing just some really great titles. And so I've been really fortunate to be on board with them for a full book. So this is the first time I've written a full module, a full book, not by myself. Obviously, I'm working with their team, but a much bigger word count than my contributions to Icewind Dale. So that's been fun. And so that's kind of my current project right now, is just finishing up that book, because it comes out next year and I'm really excited about it. And that's been just a great experience to really learn how to write a full campaign book from start to finish, and really what that entails, because it's so different from writing a one-shot adventure, obviously, right? Yeah, creating an original campaign setting and all the creatures that come with that, and everything that goes into creating a full adventure path, a full campaign path. So that's been great. It's been a good learning experience.
When's that going to come out? Do you have any idea yet, or probably not, huh?
I believe it comes out in June.
Oh, great.
And so, we're in kind of the final stages now, and then it really goes into production early next year. But yeah, the Kickstarter is all wrapped up, and they flew past most of their goals, which is awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And yeah, so that now it's all coming together.
Well, I'll put you on the spot and say I hope you'll come back and talk about that when it's getting closer to coming out. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I would love that. I will make sure to touch base with you around that time.
Well, don't worry. I'll touch base with you.
Okay, cool. I'll accept that.
Okay, I appreciate that. So yes, so great. Thank you so much. Honestly, I could have kept talking to you, but I know that I've taken a lot of your time already, and I don't want to keep you too much longer. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. It was really kind of you, and people could learn a lot from you, I think. And I think they should check out RPG Writers Workshop, and they should check out your website. It's scribemind.com, right?
Correct.
And they should check out all of your work and buy Rime of the Frost Maiden, Icewind Dale, and buy all that stuff, and buy all your modules on DM's Guild, and make you a millionaire, because you should keep creating content, because your content's awesome. So thank you.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad we were able to make this work.
Definitely. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thanks. Yeah, you too.